You are about to give birth. There is no hospital, no monitor beeping beside you, no epidural waiting in a cart down the hall. Just a small room, a few trusted women, and your own body doing something it has done for hundreds of thousands of years. Today, in much of the world, childbirth is one of the most medically managed events a human being goes through. For most of human history, it was something else entirely. It was communal. It was dangerous, and it shaped almost everything about how early human societies were built. So how did it actually work? Start with your body. Compared to almost every other primate, human childbirth is strange. Chimpanzees give birth quickly and often alone. Humans don't. Anthropologists Wenda Trevathan and Karen Rosenberg spent decades studying why, and their answer became known as the obstetrical dilemma. Here's the plain English version. Millions of years ago, your ancestors started walking upright. Walking upright reshaped the pelvis into a narrower, more efficient shape. At the same time, brains were getting bigger, and bigger brains meant bigger infant heads. Two evolutionary pressures collided: a narrower pelvis, a bigger skull trying to pass through it. Something had to give. The result is a birth canal that is, frankly, a tight fit. And a tight, twisting fit is why human birth became so difficult and so social. Trevathan's research suggests this is a major reason humans evolved to seek help during labor in the first place. Not out of tradition, out of necessity. A birth attendant could turn a stuck baby, catch a baby whose head emerged facing the wrong way, or simply keep an exhausted mother from harm. Humans, in other words, may be the only primate that evolved to need a midwife. There's another twist buried in your own anatomy. Because the human birth canal isn't just narrow, it's curved, almost like a bent tube. The baby has to rotate as it descends, turning nearly 90 degrees on its way out. No other primate's newborn has to do this. Trevathan has argued this rotation is precisely why a baby is usually born facing away from the mother, not toward her, unlike almost every other primate birth. That single anatomical detail changes everything about how a birth has to be managed. A chimpanzee mother can reach down and guide her own baby out face to face. A human mother, in the final moments, often can't see what's happening at all. She has to trust someone else's hands. Think about what that means for hundreds of thousands of years of human history. It means birth was never just a private, solvable problem between one woman and her body. It was structurally, biologically, a shared event. Now picture it. You're in labor. There's no clock on the wall, but someone is timing your pain anyway, the old way, by counting the rhythm of your breath. You're not lying flat on your back. That position is mostly a modern invention, useful for a doctor's view, not for the mother's body. For most of history, and in most cultures, anthropologists have studied women labored upright, squatting, kneeling, or hanging from a rope or a beam. Gravity did some of the work your muscles didn't have to. The room is warm. Someone is pressing a hand into your lower back. Someone else is murmuring instructions, drawn from a lifetime of watching other births. This knowledge rarely lived in books. It lived in the hands and memory of women. But some of it did make it into writing. In 11th century Salerno, in southern Italy, a set of medical texts appeared under the name Trotula. They cover pregnancy, labor, and the care of newborns in remarkable, practical detail. Herbal remedies to ease pain, techniques to turn a breech baby, instructions for cutting and tying the umbilical cord. Whether Trotula was one woman or several, historians still debate. What isn't debated is that these texts prove something important. Skilled, systematic knowledge about childbirth existed in medieval Europe, developed and passed down largely by women at a time when formal medicine mostly excluded them. Some of the Trotula material sounds startlingly modern. Advice on perineal massage, instructions to keep a laboring woman calm and reassured, because fear was already understood to slow labor down. Recipes meant to ease pain when nothing stronger existed. And some of it reads as pure medieval remedy, herbs and charms with no real physiological effect at all. That mix, real observation sitting right next to folk belief, is exactly what you'd expect from knowledge built the hard way, through generations of trial, error, and careful watching. long before anyone understood anatomy at a cellular level. Some of the trochanter material sounds startlingly modern. And it wasn't only Europe writing this knowledge down. In 2008, archaeologist Josef Wegner and his team, excavating at South Abydos in Egypt, uncovered something almost nobody expected to find intact. A birth brick, a rectangular slab of mud brick, nearly 4,000 years old, painted with images of a mother and newborn, flanked by protective deities. Egyptian women in labor stood or squatted on bricks like this one, using them almost like a birthing stool, with attendants supporting them from either side. It's one of the only physical objects from the ancient world that puts you directly in the room where birth happened. Not a painting of the idea of childbirth, the actual object women stood on. Egyptian medical papyri back this up with written detail. They describe methods for estimating how far along a pregnancy was, herbal mixtures believed to ease delivery, and even rough tests people used to try to predict a baby's sex, most of which had no real basis, but reveal just how much ancient societies wanted to bring order and prediction to something so uncertain. Birth wasn't only handled with skill, it was watched over with magic, prayer, and superstition too, because in a world with no other way to explain a difficult labor, spiritual protection was as real a tool as any physical one. So let's reconstruct a day. You're a woman in a farming village 4,000 years ago, or 400, it doesn't matter which. The pattern repeats across cultures and centuries. Labor starts, word spreads quietly. The women who matter most arrive first, maybe your mother, maybe a woman known in the village for having helped a dozen births before. She has no medical degree. She has something arguably more valuable, direct, repeated, hands-on experience with what a body in labor actually does. Hours pass. There is pain, real and unmanaged by anything stronger than herbs, pressure, and the presence of people who have seen this before and are not afraid. There is also ritual. In many cultures, prayers are spoken, amulets are placed nearby, protective symbols are painted or drawn. Fear and biology were never treated as separate problems. They were treated together. If labor stalls, the woman beside you might change your position entirely, have you walk, sway, or lean over a stool, testing what her own experience has taught her works. If the baby is turned wrong, careful hands might try, gently, to shift it. If bleeding becomes heavy afterward, there are herbs known to help the womb contract, passed down the same way everything else was, by watching, remembering, and teaching the next woman in line. None of this came from a textbook. All of it came from repetition, generation after generation, refined the way any skill is refined when the stakes are this high. And here is the twist almost nobody expects. Childbirth in the ancient and medieval world was not simply primitive and helpless compared to today. In many respects, it was more attentive to the mother's comfort and instinct than childbirth became centuries later, once it moved into hospitals and under the control of male physicians who had never given birth themselves. Upright positions, freedom of movement, constant one-on-one support, these are things modern maternity care spent decades relearning because doulas and midwifery advocates in the 20th century pointed to exactly this ancient cross-cultural pattern as something worth bringing back. That doesn't mean it was safe. It wasn't. Maternal and infant mortality in the ancient and medieval world was brutally high by any modern standard. Historians estimate a meaningful percentage of women died from complications of childbirth at some point in their reproductive lives, and infant mortality in the first year could reach a third or more in many populations. There was no answer for a truly obstructed labor, no antibiotics for infection, no blood transfusion for hemorrhage. The skill and the courage in that room were real. So were the limits of what skill alone could do. Why does any of this matter to you now? Because the tension your ancestors lived with, walking upright, thinking with a large brain, paying a real biological cost for both, is still written into your body today. Every human birth still runs through that same narrow, evolved passage. The obstetrical dilemma didn't end when hospitals appeared. It's the same dilemma. We just added tools. And the social instinct hasn't disappeared either. It resurfaces every time someone chooses to have a doula in the room, every time a birthing class teaches breathing and movement instead of pure passivity, every time a partner is told, correctly, that their presence changes outcomes. You may never think about Wenda Trevathan or Trotula of Salerno or a 4,000-year-old brick in Egypt while you're living your ordinary life. But the pattern they each documented, in a lab, in an ancient manuscript, in a slab of painted mud, is the same pattern. Birth was never meant to happen alone. You are about to give birth. There is no hospital, no monitor beeping beside you, just a room and people who chose to be there. For nearly all of human history, that was never a compromise. That was the plan.